The Toronto Sceptres lose 3-1 to the Boston Fleet in their home opener and second game of the season. And it really is unfortunate because it didn't feel like they deserved to lose this game at all. In fact, I would argue Boston deserved to lose this game. It deserved to lose it by a much wider margin than Toronto wound up losing to them. But let's get into it. Toronto had what genuinely felt like an amazing game for the first 45 minutes, I would say. The first two periods and a little bit of the third. The game started off crazy. Laura Kluga, who was on the Sceptres last year, now on the Fleet, took a delay of game penalty for putting the puck over the glass like 15 seconds into the game. Maybe it wasn't that early, but it was soon. It was very soon into the game. So Toronto was almost immediately on the power play. They didn't, but just like the game against Minnesota, it didn't look that great. It looked better than it looked against Minnesota, but it didn't look great. But for the rest of the period, Toronto just absolutely dominated. They had all the offensive zone time. They were putting on the pressure. They were hemming Boston in. Toronto did wind up shorthanded at one point for a penalty to Claire Dalton. That was a high sticking, and it was an odd high sticking because it wasn't, normally you see the high stick come up. It was, Dalton kind of like reached over and hit the Fleet player. But anyway, like it was a clear penalty. Toronto's on the kill, and they wind up, however, despite being on the kill, they wind up getting the jailbreak goal, about a minute and a half, minute 15 into the kill by none other than Blair Turnbull, who, one of the Fleet players, they trip over the blue line, and Turnbull just, beats out a race, gets around her defender, and flicks it up over the blocker of Aaron Frankel. And it's 1-0, pretty early into the game. It's looking good. Home opener, the vibes are good. Toronto's playing great, and at the end of that period, the shots were something like 11-2, or like 11-3 maybe. Like Toronto dominated the first period of that game. It was they started on time. It looked like exactly what the Sceptres want to be. Noteworthy point, Fast was back in this game after missing the first game with a small injury. However, Daryl Watts was out. I think she took a bad hit against the Frost, and I think that was just kind of ailing her still today. So they've listed her as day-to-day. Hopefully she's back by their next game, which I believe is on Thursday. But standing in her place was Messier, who's one of the reserve players that got drafted this year. They signed her to a 10-day standard player agreement. And, from the time she was out there, she looked like, fine. Emma Gentry took one penalty this game for driving it a little too hard. But she's feisty. I didn't quite realize that. Like, I knew she had a good bit of skill, obviously. She was a second-round pick, but she was she was really stirring it up all game. It was great to see because, when you look at some of the players that Toronto lost in the offseason, noteworthy again on the Fleet, Ryland McKinnon was really good at being very physical and really stirring it up. It was nice to see that someone else is able to take up that mantle. Like Malte will chirp people. We all know Malte chirps people, and Malte will get into it. But Gentry, like she goes after people. She's feisty. I like it. It's fun to watch. But anyway, into the second period, and Toronto's got the 1-0 lead. And once again, just like the first, they are owning the ice. The game. It's tilted in their favor. Like Boston can't do diddly squat against the Sceptres team that was out there tonight. They looked unbeatable for some parts. I don't even need to say that Reagan Kirk did great because she barely had to do anything. She did look good on the chances that she had to face, but Toronto was blocking all kinds of shots. They were blocking zone entries. They were keeping uh, Boston to the outside. They looked great, but every time, despite all the pressure they had, obviously they had a lot of pressure. They were getting a lot of shots, but it seemed like every time they were setting up a play, they made one too many passes. They kept looking for the pass. They weren't going for the shot. And sure, it's the team has a lot of playmakers. It's got a lot of two-way forwards. Like that, they're very good at that. It's very well constructed forward group, especially that way. But the problem is, like, if everyone's a playmaker, then who's shooting, right? So it was the chances they had. I think they would have been able to capitalize more and get more than one goal if they took the shot instead of a pass a couple of times. They slowed it down just a bit too much. And credit to Boston. They did a wonderful job on capitalizing on Toronto's mistakes. I think the one biggest chance they had in the second period, which is funny because they had a power play. I don't believe they had any shots on the power play. They had zone presence, but they didn't wind up getting anything onto Kirk. Toronto would make these little mistakes, and Boston was able to capitalize on them. There was one breakaway that Laura Kluge, I believe, had, where she kind of snuck in behind Toronto's defense and had herself a little breakaway, and great save by Kirk. But it's those little moments that Boston was able to kind of pick out of the onslaught that Toronto was pouring on this afternoon. And then, obviously, part of the issue is when you're pouring on this much and when you're having this much pressure. Boston had 3 shots in the second period. And 2 of them came on the same play, and 1 unfortunately went in. Where it was another kind of 2-on-1, 2-on-0 scenario where Jill Saunier and Abby Newhook just bearing down on Kirk. Kirk makes a really good first save, and just an unfortunate bounce. Like, Newhook didn't even get the rebound on the play. It bounced off her skate, and it bounced off her skate. It was not a kicking motion. It was not intentional. I mean, she turned it sideways to stop. And, I mean, even if it was a potential kicking motion, they got rid of the coach's challenge this year, so who's to say? But that wound up standing, and, it's one that obviously be nice to not let in, but also if Toronto's defense isn't there, and, again, it's weird bounces aren't something goalies can necessarily hop on right away because there's no inkling that it's going to happen. It just happens. Kirk made a great first save, and it just bounced off Newhook's skate, ties it up 1-1, and that's where we are heading into the third. But with all the pressure Toronto had, with nothing to show for it, and the small little, cracks in the armor that Boston was able to weasel into, in the second, I think it might have deflated Toronto's room a little bit, and I think it really boosted Boston going into the third, and that third period was all Boston. They got a great goal. Susanna Tapani, just, a very screened Reagan Kirk, couldn't see anything. They got up 2-1, and Toronto, again, they had a good bit of pressure in for a little bit there in the third period, maybe about 3-ish minutes, where they just really had Boston hemmed into their own zone. But again, just one too many passes every time before taking a shot, and they couldn't find the back of the net. And they were given a gift. Late in the third, Boston has a too many players penalty. The silliest, goofiest, does not need to happen type of penalty you could possibly take in the sport of hockey. And Boston takes it. And it's given to Toronto. They have a bit of pressure. Boston takes this dumb penalty. They're down by 1. They have the power play now. They can do it. And they spent the power play fighting for possession. And it winds up being the exact same type of power play they had in the third period against Minnesota, where they just don't do anything with it. And there were points in it where it actually looked like Boston had more pressure than Toronto when they were 1 person down. It was insane. Like, it was a complete waste of an opportunity, and like it was so frustrating to see, because it was completely wasted. Completely wasted. It was a silver platter. Boston said, "Here, you can tie the game. Here you go. We'll give you a power play for free with 5 minutes left. It's yours. Go ahead." And they did nothing with it. Nothing at all. They could barely get into Boston's zone. And it was so frustrating. And there was one chance there late in the third when Toronto had their goalie pulled. They took a timeout. Spooner collects the puck behind the net and rings it out in front. Bounces off bounces off Frankel's pad. Sitting in the crease, Turnbull whacks at it and just doesn't hit it at quite the right angle. So instead of going into the net, it goes into Frankel, and she covers it, and that's the last real good chance that Toronto will be able to get that game. The Fleet managed to get it out into the neutral zone. It's chased down by Alina Mueller, and Toronto's defense can't really do enough to get in her way. She pots the empty netter. And that was all the game had. And it's the final shots of the game. I have them right here. 25-12. More than double. More than double. But, and apparently they had 9 shots in the third. That's genuinely a surprise to me. They didn't capitalize. They made one too many passes. They tried to get a bit too fancy with their plays. It was like that situation, that clip that happened with the Philadelphia Flyers in the NHL from a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, where the guy had like a breakaway and he had a trailer, so he's breaking away, does a drop pass to his trailer, and then that guy decides to pass it back to the first guy. It's like, that is like what not to do on a breakaway 101. And that just felt like that was Toronto for the whole game. They just did a little more than they needed to, a little too much. And it cost them the game. I don't know how else to put it. They tried to get a little too cute, make too many passes, make too fancy of a play, when they just, not to sound like everyone's uncle screaming at the TV, but they just need to shoot the puck! They just need to shoot the puck! But, some positives. Obviously, it was a game that was incredibly played by the team. The pressure they had, the command they had over the vast majority of the game, even when they were on the penalty kill, it seemed like they were in the driver's seat. Like, they did a great job for most of the game. In terms of pressure, the rookies looked great. Like I mentioned, Gentry was really stirring it up. She looked really feisty. She looked really good. Zanin had a wonderful game. She had a great game. Hjalmarsson seemed to do pretty good. I think there were a few times where it looked like she maybe took a half second too long to make a decision. Well, not too long, but it's just that game sense. It's her second professional game. She's kind of just has to adjust to the speed and everything of it. But she looked pretty good. Messier, I can't honestly say I saw that much of her out there. There was a lot of positives to take from this game, and it's one where you kind of gotta look at those small things, because that's what Boston managed to win on, was capitalizing on the small mistakes. It wasn't Toronto playing poorly for the most part. It was Boston managing to get through the small cracks in the armor Toronto had to capitalize, and Toronto not managing to really do anything with the pressure they had. And of course, full credit to Erin Frankel because she's Erin Frankel. They looked much better tonight than they did on last Friday against Minnesota, because they just looked so disjointed in that first game. And obviously, there's a handful of players that haven't quite played together, and the lines aren't exactly the same, but they definitely looked a lot more coherent together. They looked a lot more like a unit. And as long as that kind of connection continues to grow, I think, we're in for a really good season because, like I said, they didn't play bad this game for the most part. That's all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching. Click like if you enjoyed this video. Click subscribe if you want to, see more of them. And, yeah, I'll be back after the next one.